Everybody wants to track down a Nazi, particularly if you're a journalist. In this interview, I'm talking to Tom Hagler, who actually found one. This was a Nazi doctor behind the killing of lots of children for things ridiculous reasons such as being blind, deaf, or having a cleft palate. Incredibly, this doctor was still practicing at the same hospital many, many years later, and Tom tells us the story.
I think the thing I most remember is I went to a hospital. It's now called the Otto Wagner Hospital, and cozy little suburbs of Vienna. It's a big sprawling medical complex. Um, Back in the 40s, it was called Am Steinhof, and I went there to speak to the medical director of the hospital um, about what had happened during the war. Um, they discovered all these children's brains, hundreds of them in glass jars of formaldehyde, and they weren't sure what to do. So they'd asked Vienna City Council, um, would like to have a proper burial. You know, these were the brains of children, spinal cords of children murdered by the Nazis. Uh, what should we do? So I was following that story, and I was particularly interested in one doctor who seemed to have evaded justice. His name was Dr. Heinrich Gross. And I wasn't sure what had happened to him. It wasn't clear. And the man I was speaking to sort of let slip that he had worked after the war in this hospital still, in the same hospital. And I had to do, I did a double take because I thought my German was bad or his English was bad. We were speaking bilingually. But no, it appeared that he had worked there, but he was also a bit evasive as to when. So I walked out of the hospital, and rather than just go out the door, I thought I'd just have a look around, see what would find. And right there by the gate was this building. It's quite a dark looking building, 2 stories, about 150 years old, heavy doors, and it said on it Ludwig Boltzmann Institute. And that rang a bell because I thought they do research, and I'm sure I remember something somewhere, something I'd read. So anyway, I went in there, opened this heavy door, and it sort of slowly closed behind me. And right there on the door to my left was this black sign with writing on, and it said Dr. Heinrich Gross. And I almost fell over, and I thought, all these years, 52 years after, in the same place where he'd killed all these children, he's still working.
How did it all begin?
Well, it's difficult to know where to start, but 1933 is probably a good point. Hitler's just come to power. One of the very first things he does is introduce an act to sterilize people he deems, or are deemed, feeble-minded, was a phrase. Physically disabled people, mentally disabled people, alcoholics, prostitutes. And the Nazis, bizarrely now for us, publicize this. They think this is going to catch on with the public. It's going to be really popular. One of the things to remember is the Germans at that point weren't so different from what some other countries were doing. The US had a forcible sterilization policy in the 20s. So did Canada. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were forcibly sterilized. There was an idea called social Darwinism, which took the ideas of Darwin, the survival of the fittest, to paraphrase it, put it into a social sphere. You're not fit. You're not fit to reproduce. We decide, and we'll stop it. And it's interesting. Within a month of coming to power, he's passed this. The idea of his racial hygiene theories, the idea of a Übermensch idea, a Superman, an Untermensch idea, that's right at the very heart of why he thinks he's in power and what he wants to do. These are key concepts right at a fundamental part of Nazi ideology. They're not just an adjunct put on later. This develops, hundreds of thousands of people are sterilised. And slowly the calls grow within the Nazi Party for this to be expanded. And expanded means killing people, adults and children. 1939 September, the war breaks out. They invade Poland. October, in fact, possibly even late September, Hitler forms a Reichscommittee to euthanize adults and children. Euthanize means a happy death or a mercy killing. This isn't that. This is straight up murder. So they'll decide who lives, who dies, and they're going to kill him.
And you mentioned in the preamble to this that there were pluses and minuses. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, the plus and minus refers to these medical reports that doctors had to fill in. So the doctors and midwives were ordered to report all new births and any children under the age of 3 who they felt had any defect whatsoever. And there were threats. The form would be sent to 3 supposed medical experts who were Nazi fanatics, basically, and believed in racial hygiene laws, eugenics, as they were called, trying to improve the breeding stock of the German race, if you like. These reports would come back with a simple plus or minus. A plus meant the person, the child in this case, would be included in the program. The program meant you were going to kill them. And there was one example of one clinic, one doctor reported after the war of 95% of the forms they sent in, 95% of them came back with a plus.
I'm curious to know, you said that at the heart of this there were some Nazi doctors, but then there's the general population of doctors. Was there an outcry from doctors? And then later on, what did the parents think about all this? But let's do the doctors first.
There were many doctors who were shocked and appalled. And Hitler passed this, started this just as the war broke out. And you can't help feeling that he realised that this would upset a huge amount of the German population, and the war could act as a sort of smokescreen. Doctors did try, some, to avoid sending in reports. Some moved their patients to other areas, so they were off the records. Parents started to slowly realise what was going on, but there was pressure on them to report it. So, for example, if you had any other children and you didn't report that your child had a hair lip, they would take the other children off you. Parents were also threatened, as were doctors, with being sent to labour camps. So this is moving on a bit, 1940, 41, as it's becoming clearer what's going on. Labour camps, a type of concentration camp, if you like. So there was one protest, as far as I'm aware, round about 1940, again at this very hospital that I'm speaking about, Am Steinhof in Vienna, where a group of people got together from Vienna, including some Nazi officials, because these were their uncles and aunts and grandmothers, nephews, nieces, children, disappearing. They didn't quite know what was going on, but I think they realised that something was going on and it wasn't good and people were dying. And Hitler then disbanded what he called the T4 program, which was the euthanasia of adults. But all it did was go underground. As for the children, well, they started to be killed.
Yeah, so terrible question, but what happened to the kids? What actually happened?
Well, I've got a list of some of the things they did. I mean, there was standard torture. They were just beaten. They were starved. You can see photos of them. They stick thin. In winter, they would pull the blankets off and leave the windows open. So they would die. There was something called a cold water cure. So they were put in baths of ice till they turned blue. Their bowels would stop working at that point. There was something called a sulfur cure. These were called cures, when they were an injection of sulfur into their legs, it made them immobile. So that's, for example, if they said they were going to run away. There were spinal injections of morphine. They were given numerous sedatives and various injections. And these would slow down your heart. And if you're starving and cold and already weak, that would often be enough to kill you. They were called luminol and phenobarbital and stuff like that. They were infected. They were taken to the Vienna Medical University, where they were infected with tuberculosis. And then they were given trial vaccines. It was incredibly painful. And then you've got the disease. That would often kill them. They would then, once they died, take out their brains and spinal cords and you carry out autopsies and experiments on them. In part, I think they believed that was medical research. In part, I think that was a reason to somehow justify to some of the nurses and doctors that there was somehow some science going on.
Well, so in what you said, it sounds like some people were probably possessed by the idea that medical advancement you needed to test certain things, and some of what you said, I could imagine, could be justified to medical people as a piece of research, a clinical trial, or something like that. But other parts of it clearly are not. So what kept it going really with the doctors and nurses?
Some were fanatics. Some were believers. They believed in the racial hygiene laws. They believed they were purifying the German race, I'm sure. And they said as much when they went to trial in Nuremberg. Some of them were hanged. Others would need more persuading, and others still were against it, but were scared. There is a report, and we'll come on to that, of one nurse managing to help a young lad of 12 who'd been kept in solitary confinement for a year, help him escape. And I ended up talking to him. But others were fanatics. There was one doctor who decided he didn't want to wear the white gown of a doctor as he walked around the wards and the corridors. He put on his brown Sturmabteilung, the SA uniform, and he had his shiny boots, and you'd hear him clomping on the tile floors, terrified the children. His nickname was Dr. Speiberl, which means Dr. Vomit. That was the name they gave them because he gave them injections that made them vomit. This is almost certainly phenobarbital or some sedative. That was often the way they were killed. And that doctor's name was Dr. Heinrich Gross.